Hey guys, Nike here. I wanted to start this off with an apology for making another guide video so recently after my last one. Um, but honestly, so much has come to light. We've been doing so much testing and playing around with different stuff and doing math and having feedback from the community and having debates with other dungeon runners who are very skilled and very knowledgeable about the game. That we've just come up with a lot of new stuff and changed our opinion on a lot of things, and I want to go over everything with you so that everyone's up to date. So if you forgive me for that, that'd be great. The short version of the story is that ever since the beginning of the game, the concept was that Greatsword skills 2, 3, 4, and 5 had this great burst ability, but the auto attack was terrible. So the logic, and the axe has a wonderful auto attack. So the logic was always that you would use your Greatsword burst skills, switch to axe, do some auto attacks with axe and some vuln stacking skills, and then when fast hands made your cooldown come up faster, you could switch back to Greatsword and do your burst skills again. And it seemed logical, it made a ton of sense, and it was pretty much the meta for well over a year, maybe more even. So it was also always taken for granted the idea that a pure axe build would have better DPS over time than the Greatsword build. But it was close enough that you didn't feel bad using the Greatsword axe mace because Greatsword itself had good burst and it had whirlwind attack, which was an evasion. And it had good mobility with rush and whirlwind attack. So there was a lot of utility going with Greatsword. And the difference was supposed to be not very much, so that you didn't feel like you were gimping your DPS by going with Greatsword. So after the patch, when dual wield agility came out, what we looked at was that, well, the thought being, well, axe is already better than Greatsword. So if you're adding another, say, 10% before we knew what the actual addition was, which is about 8%, it's just going to put axe so far ahead that Greatsword isn't competitive anymore. And as it turns out, that was only half true. What happened was we were initially challenged on the math behind whether pure axe was better. I think we did enough. We made enough of an argument to show that a pure axe build now is about, even with dual wield agility, is about 6% better DPS than Greatsword axe mace. And I'm fairly happy with that conclusion, fairly confident that we have the accurate answer, and everything there is good. So, when I was looking at the numbers, I saw something strange. In the Greatsword axe mace build, the Greatsword was accounting for a little bit more than 2/3 of the DPS of the entire Greatsword axe build. So I was like, wow, the axe auto attack is terrible compared to the Greatsword burst. It's really not helping. And when you switch to axe, there's going to be 2 or 3 seconds where you're stuck on axe, but your Greatsword burst is ready to go again. So that has to be costing you DPS. So I thought to myself, maybe Greatsword auto attack just isn't that bad. Maybe it's worth looking at whether you lose more by missing out on your burst skills as soon as they're ready than you do by just camping Greatsword. So I was thinking out loud on the forums, and I made that comment, like, I wonder if it is better. And then I thought to myself, well, why don't I test it? So I did. And I did not expect to have the results I did. And after I got the results I did, I made sure that I had DEKeyz, who is a guildmate of mine who's known for her Ellie guide. And she's very good at math. Double check my work and do video frame by frame sequencing to make sure I wasn't miscounting anything and I wasn't doing anything wrong. And her conclusion was that I was right. It turns out that currently, and probably always, a pure Greatsword build is better DPS than any rival. Especially now that the second sigil of DPS can be put on the Greatswords. Greatsword camping is just superior DPS to either pure axe or Greatsword axe mace. In the description of this video below and in my written guide, I'm going to have a link to a little chart that shows the DPS breakdown of all the different builds. so that you can kind of get a reference of where everything stacks up. So please reference that. So first, I'll start when we go over the builds by saying that the different types of builds have shaken up a little bit, and every build is going to be a base greatsword build, and you're going to be on greatsword pretty much as your main primary weapon. So the first build we're going to look at is the main warrior build, and that is based on empowered allies. You're going to go 4 into tactics and take empower allies and empowered. Empower allies is going to give 150 points of power to everyone in your party, which is really good. As everyone knows, that works out to be about a 5% DPS boost for your entire party. And empowered works out to be between a 3 and 8% DPS boost for yourself, so it's a pretty decent trait. For the next part, since we're a greatsword build, we're going to go 4 into strength and take slashing power. Used to be in the pure axe version, you would take dual wielding here in the adept level. Unfortunately, there's nothing that buffs greatsword damage in particular. The best trait to take is Great Fortitude. 7% of your power is converted to vitality, gets your health way up to a kind of ridiculously high level. You could take anything else, but I think it's the only one that actually is going to do something for you on a regular basis. And then with our remaining 6 points, we're going to go 30 into arms. At the adept level, we're going to take deep strikes. Deep strikes is going to give us about 4% chance to crit. Additionally, deep strikes is currently bugged and gives you a free Signet of Might. So technically, right now, it's giving us 6% chance to crit and 180 power, which is pretty darn ridiculous for an adept level trait. It's an adept level trait that's giving us close to 10% DPS boost, so you can't go wrong with deep strikes. At the master level, we're going to take rending strikes for Vuln for the team. And then at the grandmaster level, we'll take forceful greatsword, and this will be what makes the greatsword DPS so good by getting the cooldowns on the skills, allowing us to use our burst skills more often. When I discuss the rotations at the end of the video, it's very easy. It's basically whenever skills 2, 3, 4, and 5 are off cooldown, you will use them. In the auto attack chain, feel free to interrupt it, but I'll go into all that. Forceful greatsword is what makes the clock tick. So that is the main warrior build. This is the build if you are in a decent group. This will be the first warrior that you're going to run. If you only have one warrior in your group, you want to run these traits. It's going to do the most for your party with empower allies and hurt your personal DPS the least. This is what I would suggest you run. Now, if you're the second warrior in the party, you're going to want to run a slightly different build. You're going to get rid of empower allies because you don't need a redundant empower allies, and you can go into strength. And at the grandmaster level, you take berserker's power. The traits are pretty much identical, except now you're doing a lot more DPS. This is the pure DPS warrior build. Weapons are the same, obviously. The traits are pretty much identical. You just trade away empowered allies for berserker's power, and you do a lot more damage. This build is very competitive as far as total DPS goes. Especially with the Camping Greatsword, it is fully buffed in the 13,000 per second damage range, which not every group is going to be able to do. The optimal conditions aren't always going to exist, but relatively speaking, this is a very, very high DPS build. So, this is also the build I would use if you are soloing content. However, I would make a slight change. If you are soloing content, you're going to take 2 out of tactics and go 2 into discipline for Signet Mastery. What this does is when you're soloing content, Fury uptime is important. So getting the additional Fury uptime from your Signet of Rage will be very helpful, and Might uptime also very helpful. But otherwise, the traits should remain the same, more or less. When in the past, for solo builds, we always advocated fast hands to allow you to use your utility skills on your swap set, and to what we thought was maximize your DPS. However, the way it works, after the reanalysis is that you're just better off camping your greatsword as much as possible. However, there are times, certain bosses, like the best example is DPS, where you're going to want to switch to your swap set for, say, sword block, or for the energy sigil that's on your sword that gives you an additional dodge. You can do that with this build with a slight modification. When you know you're in an encounter where you have to swap to your swap set, what you want to do is change out Great Fortitude for dual wielding, change out Deep Strikes for Rending Strikes, change out Rending Strikes for Forceful Greatsword, and take your Grandmaster trait Dual Wield Agility. So because you don't have fast hands, you're going to be stuck on your axe set for about 5 seconds longer than normal. So since you're stuck on your axe set, you might as well make the best of it, take Dual Wield Agility and dual wielding, and you won't feel too terribly bad about being stuck on your axe set, even if it is only for 5 seconds. Especially also when you're soloing DPS and you switch to your axe sword, you're doing it for the block and for the extra dodge, so there's going to be a pretty decent amount of time where you're not attacking anyway. So it'll work out to be somewhat analogous to before. But your overall DPS, especially when you're on the greatsword set, will more than make up for it. So once you are done with the sword block and done with the extra dodge you got, you can go back to your greatsword and resume your big DPS. But that would be where you'd want to go for soloing. Now, the last build, and this is something that I had previously considered to be kind of a joke, especially when I heard the trait, is Phalanx Strength. Now, Phalanx Strength, what that does, and I will show you in just a second when I recalibrate my traits here. Phalanx Strength is a Grandmaster Tactics trait. It gives, whenever you grant might yourself, you grant it to your allies as well. And it lasts for a base 6 seconds. So when do you use a Phalanx Strength build? Phalanx Strength build shares capabilities with the Empowered Allies build. They're very similar. They do similar things in terms of buffing your team. If you are in a group with an Ellie, or 2 Ellies even, you don't need Phalanx Strength. The Ellies will give you enough might, along with your For Great Justice, that Phalanx Strength is completely redundant and is doing nothing but lowering your personal DPS. However, if you're in a pug and no one is stacking might, no one is utilizing fire fields, no one's utilizing blasts, and pretty much the whole party is just sitting there with no might, Phalanx Strength is going to be a humongous boost for your party, and you should probably be running a build with Phalanx Strength because it's going to cap might for your party. Now, the other place for even an organized group to use Phalanx Strength is in Fractals. There's a lot of fights like Mossman, the Arch Diviner, even the Dredge Clown Car, where it's either difficult to stack might effectively because you have to move around so much and everyone has to kind of spread out a little bit, and you can't stack together to blast fire fields, and there's no time to do that. Or the Clown Car, where it's so long and tedious that it's just boring and tedious to go, okay, our might's running out, everyone restack, get your blast finishers ready. You want to just have something kind of mindless like Phalanx Strength that will mindlessly keep your might up. So these are the base traits that you would run with Phalanx Strength. You'll go into Discipline for Signet Mastery to give you additional might uptime. Combos well with Phalanx Strength. So I looked at variants of Phalanx Strength. A lot of people suggested that you go 4 in Strength, 4 in Arms, and 6 in Tactics. I compared the numbers. This works out to be about 5% better than that. So this is the way I would recommend you build your Phalanx Strength Warrior if you're going to maximize DPS. Someone did also suggest a pure axe version that uses Sigil of Strength on the axe to kind of approximate what Forceful Greatsword does. That could work, but I think that sacrifices some of the DPS that you gain from going into Strength and getting dual wielding, as opposed to the Signet Mastery, is outweighed by the Sigil that you have to give up to stack the Strength. But nonetheless, that is an option if you prefer pure axe, but I believe that this is going to utilize much better DPS for you. So that's it for the builds. They kind of they've moved around roles a little bit. There's the new Phalanx Strength build. So there's a lot to think about. I'm sure you guys will have questions. You can definitely ask me in the comments. I'll be happy to answer. So for gear, The main gear for the EA build, as well as the DPS Warrior, is full Berserker with Runes of the Scholar. The Phalanx Strength build and the soloing build will want to replace their Runes of the Scholar with Runes of Strength. It is your call on how you play the game more to determine which rune set is better for you. Are you the type of player that enjoys soloing a raw and trying to solo other dungeons and fighting and soloing open world champions and that sort of thing all by yourself? Do you also do a lot of pug fractals with disorganized groups? Then you are probably going to want to play a build. You're probably going to want to gear with Rune of Strength and play builds that are geared towards maximizing Rune of Strength. If you play in organized groups or at least semi-decent pugs where you gear check and make sure people seem to know what they're doing, Rune of the Scholar is going to give you better results. So that's it for gear. My main greatsword that I will carry most often is going to have Night Sigil and Force Sigil. Most of the dungeons and fractals in the game are nighttime, so it's just a pure gain, and I will use that in those instances. Inside of a Ra, I will equip a weapon with Undead Slaying and Force. And additionally, I carry a Bloodlust stacking greatsword with Force to allow me to build up Bloodlust stacks when that is practical to do. I should also mention that you do need a spear with Bloodlust Sigil on it. The Bloodlust Sigil on your spear will allow you to unequip your greatsword that has Bloodlust Sigil and keep your stacks, as you can see. I don't see any indication that ANET's thinking about nerfing it. They haven't commented on it one way or the other. I don't think anyone has seen a dev say whether they're going to change that. If they change it, they change it. If not, then just enjoy it. So if they change it, then we'll have to re-examine what sigils to use, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. No sense in speculating. The other cool thing is, since your main greatsword and you're rarely going to swap, you can use your swap set for utility. My standard is a sword and warhorn so that I can be as fast as possible when moving through zones for the vigor on demand. It helps with trash running in dungeons, and in open world, the sword Savage Leap and the swiftness helps you run around more, and it's just altogether really good for mobility. So that's my go-to set. What else would I ever put on my side set? There are times, like I said, when you're fighting Lupicus, where you want an axe and a sword with Sigil of Energy. This is sort of my Lupicus setup, where I'll have axe and an energy swap on my offhand sword for blocks. This is pretty good setup for soloing pretty much any boss in the game, so you can use that setup. I have a shield for PvP mostly. So I have a hammer for PvP mostly. Additionally, I keep a stacking mace. There are times where you're fighting trash mobs and you definitely want to knock them down. The tremor from the mace, number 5, is exceptionally good against trash mobs. It allows you to knock down a big pull of trash mobs and have your team and yourself DPS them down while they're or incapacitated. And it's also, when you're fighting trash mobs, a good time to build up stacks. So I have a stacking Bloodlust for that occasion, and then once I have my stacks built up, I can switch to a Bloodlust with Force on it. Additionally, I keep a axe with Night for the same purpose in case I'm in a nighttime dungeon. Additionally, I will keep a longbow on me for the occasions where I am responsible for dropping a fire field for the party to stack might, and the rare occasions where I need the pin down for mobilize, or heaven help us, we have to range something. But that is definitely a rundown of the different scenarios of where I would use which gear set. But for the most part, it's relatively simple. You get a greatsword, DPS sigils, and go to town. So the last thing I want to talk about is the consumables I use in dungeons, because people do tend to ask me about those, and I think it's worth going into. So the first thing is the food that you're going to want to use. Currently, the best 2 foods for DPS are bowls of sweet and spicy butternut squash soup and plates of truffle steak. They do roughly the same damage. I think the sweet and spicy butternut soup for a fully maxed out warrior build is like 0.5% better than truffle steak. And truffle steak is 6 times cheaper than sweet and spicy butternut squash soup. So you can take truffle steak and feel perfectly fine about it and save some coin. I like truffle steaks. They're good. Sometimes I want the extra precision that they get more than I want the crit damage, and I also don't want to blow these because they're very expensive and I don't want to replace them. When they inevitably fix the deep strike bug and I lose this extra sigil, or extra signet I should say, gaining the precision from curry butternut squash soup will be useful again, and I won't feel bad about using these, and it'll help you get to 100% chance to crit. The bowls of butternut squash soup are actually surprisingly competitive now. They're very cheap to make compared to other foods, and you only lose 10 ferocity, which isn't even a full 1% crit damage. So the difference between the expensive stuff, the curry butternut, and the cheap stuff, the butternut squash, is about 1% crit chance and about 2/3 of 1% crit damage. So they're very, very close. It's less than, it's maybe a 1% DPS difference between these two, and it's a much cheaper food to have. So that's good to look out for. Plates of steak and asparagus. This is my cheap go-to open world food. It gives you power, gives you precision. It's 1%. It's not even 1% less crit chance than the plate of truffle steak, and it's a -20 difference in power. These are dirt cheap. I think they're like a few copper last I looked. You can just load up on these and keep them and just use them as your general DPS food. Just for casual stuff, and especially in Fractals, I like this heal on crit food. It's pretty good. Gives you precision, gives you a chance to heal, or I should even say lifesteal, which is better than heal because it does damage. So it increases your DPS a little bit, keeps you healthy. That's good. Additionally, I keep trays of omnumberry pies and mixed berry pies. These are good for Fractals, for casual Fractals, or if you're pugging. When you're in a pug, you can't really account for what people are running. You don't know what food they're going to have, and so if you drop a tray of heal on crit food, you can't really go wrong with that because it's going to help people out. It's going to keep some of the people that might not be so good in the party up and on their feet, which is where you want them to be. I also suggest you take the full complement of dungeon potions and slayer potions and use them where they are most efficient. You should always use some kind of potion if there is a type of, if the mobs you're fighting in that instance fit one of the potions. Helps to keep the full set. I highly recommend it. Lastly, I do keep scale venom. There are certain Fractals where there is no good slayer potion, and the weakness that you get with the scale venom is pretty decent. Additionally, there are Fractals where the weakness doesn't matter, and there still isn't a good slayer potion. Like when you're fighting Mossman, as far as anyone knows, no slayer potion works on Mossman, and giving him 1 second of weakness is hardly worth it. So in that case, you want to go with sharpening stones to get additional power. Some other random consumables I keep harpy feathers. These give you stealth for a few seconds. It's good for breaking combat. It's good when you're soloing content to run when you're running dungeons and stuff. However, I want to warn you, the event to get these bugs out quite a bit, and with the change to mega servers, it is very, very, very difficult to get these harpy feathers. So if you ever do the event and you doesn't bug out and the merchant actually spawns for you, do make sure you buy all the harpy feathers you can get, because they are very difficult. I have not been able to go, and I've tried multiple times to go get more harpy feathers, and the event's bugged out. So treat these like gold. They are worth their weight in gold. Do not get rid of these, and definitely get as many as you can when you have the opportunity. Additionally, I keep an ogre pet whistle. It summons like a little crappy ranger pet that is mostly used to provide an additional target for when you do feedback on Lupicus to make the damage on Lupicus bigger. One of the lesser known things it does is it's also a stun breaker. So if you're in a situation where you know you need a stun breaker, you can use the pet whistle as your stun breaker. It's pretty niche in its uses, but if you know there's a situation where you need a stun breaker, you're going to need a stun breaker, and you don't want to use balance stance on your bar, you can make sure you have your inventory window open and double-click that pet whistle. And lastly, I highly recommend, most people do this, get a Karmic Infusion on a Distinguished Circle of Logic. Low-level fractals are the best way to farm Karma right now. So I would definitely consider getting one of these. It's a good investment. It'll pay off for itself in no time. So that's it, really, as far as the gear goes for the warrior and the consumables. So what I want to do in closing is discuss the DPS rotation. It's about the easiest rotation ever. You want to open up fights with 2, 3, 4, and 5. If your target's up against a wall, don't use Blade Trail. It won't help you. Just go 2, 3, and 5. If your target's in the open, you can go 2, 3, 4, and 5, and it'll be good. Just continue auto-attacking with your Greatsword until 100 Blades comes off cooldown, then 100 Blades again. And just keep repeating that. Use these skills whenever they come up off cooldown. 100 Blades should be used immediately off cooldown. What you want to do, it doesn't matter if you interrupt your Greatsword auto attack. In fact, interrupting your Greatsword auto attack to do one of these is a DPS increase, because the first hit of the Greatsword auto attack is actually good DPS because it has a very short aftercast. The other two attacks, the second and third attack in the chain, have very long cast times and long aftercasts, and they kind of suck. So if you can work it so that you go 100 Blades, and then one auto attack, and then a whirlwind on your second time through the rotation, that's fine. Don't feel bad about interrupting your Greatsword auto. So it's about the simplest rotation ever. Most people are very used to playing with a Greatsword. You don't need me to tell you how to do that. So that's it, guys. I want to thank you again for putting up with the fact that I came out with this about 10 days after the last one. But I know you guys subscribe to my channel and you watch my videos because you want to stay on top of whatever the current builds are and what the dungeon guilds are doing, so that you guys can have the coolest builds. And I wouldn't put this video out if I didn't think it was an important change, and I'm glad you are going to forgive me ahead of time, I'll assume, for changing it up so quickly. But when new information comes to light, you got to change and adapt, and that's what we're doing. So again, I thank you so much for putting up with it. I hope you enjoy this build. I hope everything works out for you. And if you have any questions, hit me up in the comments. I'll be very happy to answer them for you. Thanks, guys.